Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. That's good, Matt. It's very clear. I just need to pause the recording because we're others to arrive. We're running a little bit late, so we'll just. Welcome everybody. This is Doug McCall from work with the International Schoolhog Network. Very pleased to welcome you to this fourth session in this series of discussions around implementation, capacity, and sustainability issues. I'm very pleased to be welcoming three of our panel members to the session today. And the focus is, as noted in the title, we're hoping that we can start a discussion about the agenda of issues that we need to consider in this list. Not that we can do them all at once, and not everybody's interested in all of the issues, but I'm very hopeful that we can help to set an agenda here. I'm pleased to introduce Oddrun Samdal from the University of Bergen in Norway, Louise Rowling from the University of Sydney in Australia, and the Marc Deschênes from the Institut National de Santé Publique du Québec as our three initial presenters. In terms of the participation, if you can, I see several people have already done that already. If you do not have a microphone with an external microphone to your computer, we'd invite you to use the chat box. And if you look at the lower left, you can see that Yes has already said hello. All you do is type in your message, a short message, into that white area right below the chat box, and then click on Enter, and the comment or the questions will show up into the meeting room. And I'm going to encourage people to do that even during the presentation. We won't interrupt the presentations, the initial presentations, but then we'll come back to them. So if as you're listening to our three speakers today, if you have a thought or a question or a comment, please type it in, and then I'll be coming back to them and reading them out so that we have a verbal presentation of the question or the comment. We also have other ways to register your participation, and one of them is we use quite a bit, which is the raising of a hand. If you have a question, I will be notified about that, and that's the little hand right underneath your name. And then you also are able to have different emotions expressed. The one that's used most often at the end of the session is this one. If you look at my name on the screen, you'll see that you should see that there's a little clapping going on, a little applause going on, and so that's one way of doing it. So that's in terms of feedback. Thus far, we've been keeping it fairly simple. And if you do have a microphone, please go under Tools at the top of the page, select Audio, and then select Audio Wizard to make sure that your audio is working. When you do that, I will see that you're testing your audio, and then I will have a sense of who is got an external microphone. Unfortunately, microphones based in the computers don't have the echo dampening device or feature, and so what happens if people use the speakers in their computers is that we'll get quite a serious echo going on. So I'd ask you to refrain from doing that, but to rather use the chat box as a way of making a comment or a question. So I'm going to then, if there's no other initial questions, I'm going to go to Oddrun and ask Oddrun to start us off with her remarks on and setting an agenda for implementation, capacity, sustainability, and systems change issues. Oddrun?
Thank you very much, Doug, and thank you for inviting me to join the discussion that has been going on within this network for a long time, and share some of my own work that I have been doing in collaboration with Louise Rowling, and it's also nice to be starting a collaboration also with Marc Deschênes. So what I thought I would give emphasis to in my presentation is the importance of leadership in implementation of health promoting schools. And I will start out by sharing this that might be familiar with you from the Edelman and Taylor, saying good work, but I think we need just a little bit more detail right here. When there is a complex educational reform strategy all of a sudden increasing achievement. So what happened and what can cause this little miracle? And then I think a key player in that miracle production or change process is the leadership at school, and how they are able to initiate processes that are motivating for their staff and for their students and stakeholders to join into, and build good working teams and being part of leading a good approach towards achieving their goals for change. And in a leadership role, there are, I'm sure you're familiar with it, but I think it's a good starting point to keep awareness around that we differentiate between management and leadership behaviors when we're talking about the leadership role. And in a management role, and those who are mainly focusing on management, they tend to focus on planning and organizing, maybe controlling that people do their work, but coordination and directing and budgeting. There are also some strategic work in there, but it's related to managing activities and resources. In leadership capacity and in the leadership focus of the role, the leader are more focusing on visions and showing where do we want to go and what do we want to achieve and why do we want to achieve this and how can this achievement be related to our overall goals and be an inspirational source to stimulate motivation and good teamwork and building on the resources within the staff and among the students and stakeholders. And in the leadership role, people don't tend to do either or, but maybe some do more of the one or the other. But both the management and the leadership approach is needed in my understanding of a successful leadership approach. And what I thought I would do fairly briefly before the next two speakers go on is to share with you the findings from two papers that Louise Rowling and myself have published recently addressing implementation components of health promoting schools. So they were recently published in Health Education as of end of last year. And what we did in that approach, trying to look into implementation components for health promoting school, was to build on the main idea of the health promoting school approach being a whole school community approach, a system-oriented approach, addressing organizational development and learning, and certainly a very multidisciplinary science base for the research and for the practice taking place. So we used the narrative synthesis of available English literature in the period of 1995 till 2010, that had been describing implementation of health promoting schools. And we deliberately chose to not go into prepackaged programs that are addressing parts of what normally or typically are included in health promoting schools, such as smoke-free programs, the physical activity approaches, or nutrition programs, but we were looking at more than the whole school health promotion approach. And then we only were able to identify 7 sources that had described components that they found to be important in a successful health promoting school implementation. I will not go into the details and list the 7 publications, but share with you the 8 components that we extracted then from these 7 publications. And what we some of them had addressed all, but mostly the publications would have been addressing up to 4 of these components identified here. So the components we then identified to be crucial and important in a health promoting school approach to make that a successful approach was preparing and planning for school development, policy and institutional anchoring, professional development and learning, and then you see 4, leadership and management practices. And 5 is relational and organizational support context, student participation, partnership and networking, and finally sustainability. And what I will aim to do now in the minutes I have left of my presentation is to then specifically address how leadership is important and can be addressed when looking at the 7 other implementation components. I will, however, not talk about student participation because Louise Rowling in her presentation will specifically address that. So, looking at then at the first component that we identified important for successful implementation of health promoting schools, it's related to preparing and planning for school development. And in that phase, the leadership part of the creation of vision, developing readiness, commitment, and alignment to creating or addressing health promotion in a school setting would be a key task of the leadership. And then to stimulate involvement of staff, of students, of stakeholders in taking management approaches towards establishing a planning group, for instance, where where representatives of the mentioned groups are involved, and also contribute in the identification of concrete policies, structures, and practices, and the activities that they are going to undertake throughout their implementation approach. At the bottom of each slide, you will see a reference to a theoretical base for each of these components. I will not go in detail to that, but I have left them there for your own reference later on. So the second component is then policy and institutional anchoring, and again, it's quite evident that the leadership would play a core role in taking part of making sure that the Health Promoting School initiative is included in the written policies in the school setting. And we all know that when a policy or an approach is written into a policy document, it has a stronger commitment towards those who are involved of meeting the goals of such a document. And again, that contributes to underline how a Health Promoting School initiative contributes to meeting the overall goals and visions of the school. Professional development and learning was the third component that was very evident in several of the 7 publications, and the importance that the staff felt competent and in terms of their role and the approaches needed for health promotion interventions. And again, it will be a key role of the leadership to ensure that professional development approaches are offered either as an in-service approach or also outside of school training that might take place. And in a whole school health promotion approach, the involvement of the whole staff in such professional development approaches are crucial to the development and the success of the approach. And now the observant reader here will have noticed that I have now skipped the student participation slide and gone straight into the relational and organizational support context. And again, it is in the leadership role to partake in stimulating good team working and involving teachers and staff in different, to take part in the both the development and the implementation of concrete activities within classes, across classes, and to ensure that there are good support structures for the teachers to be able to partake in planning, for instance, in terms of they need timetabling of having not having classes if they are going to work together with a given group. So that given group would have to have their timetables scheduled with similar space and option for meeting time, for instance. It is also looking into how the physical environment can contribute to activities. If, for instance, if physical activity is a key issue that the school wants to address, how this physical environment of the school can be used to maximize opportunities for students and staff to be physically active throughout a day. And then also looking into the more, money-based resources. And again, so we see here that some of the management structures and of the leadership role comes into important play as well. I said wrong earlier, didn't I? I said 4, I skipped 4, which was student participation, but of course that was the leadership role. So here comes student participation, which I will now skip. And the 7th component is the partnership and networking. And again, what needs to be addressed here is how to involve and build on competence and resources that are represented in partnership with school health services, with parents, with local communities, etc. And again, it is important that the leadership is active in inviting stakeholders in, ensuring that their competence and contribution is wanted, and invite them into decision making around the development of projects. Of course, in collaboration with the staff at the school and the students and their involvement. So this is to then make efficient use of the resources and competences available. And the final component is related to sustainability. And that is something that has to be addressed throughout each of the components, or again, addressing each of the components, 7 previous components, in terms of continued planning of new activities, continued focus on professional development, for instance, new teachers coming in that didn't partake in the initial preparatory phase, the readiness building, the vision building, so that they can easily get on board in terms of the activities that are going on. Continue to focus on institutionalization and policy document anchoring, etc., to make sure that the approach keeps live and keeps refreshed and keeps up to date in terms of the competence needed to be able to ensure continued development. So these components, as you will see, by addressing leadership, the idea was for me to try to demonstrate that these components are not separate from each other, but the component number 4 that we identified, addressing the importance of leadership, actually goes through all of the 7 others in terms of the important role the leadership has to play in initiating and stimulating the processes that are needed for the 7 other components. And similarly, there are interactions between the different components that we will not be addressing, or I will not be addressing specifically now. What I was thinking that maybe throughout this discussion, or something that is important for the further use and of the components, would be to get some feedback in terms of the components themselves. Are they sufficiently explicit and concrete to facilitate change in schools? And are there core theoretical links missing? Core practice knowledge missing? And what are the practice skills needed? So I have now primarily been talking more about the overall components and the specific component, the content of them. What we did in our second paper, that was called Filling the Black Box, was to try to go one step further and closer to the practice field and talk more specifically about what do you need to do, what are the activities or approaches that you need to initiate related to each of the components. For instance, in the planning and phase, the importance of having the project group ready and for professional development, how and what type of courses or approaches you can take. But I will stop here and then give the word to Louise.
Thank you very much, Oddrun. And for participants, if we can, if you have questions or comments based on Oddrun's remarks, please just type them into the chat box now as we proceed to the next presenter, and I'll come back to them after we've heard from all three presenters. So, Louise, if we'll just get to your slides, which are should be right about here. One more, I think. Two more. There we go. So, Louise, if you'd like to start your remark, that'd be great.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Doug, and good afternoon and good evening to Oddrun, and it's good morning here in Australia, and it's amazing to think that we can do these things and still manage to fit them around other parts of our lives. As Oddrun said, I'm going to take this looking at the components one step further, and I'm going to let's go down to a lot more specifically things. Now, Oddrun was talking about what are we talking about in these components, and I'm talking about how then. How would we, having these components, how would somebody in a school do it? And we often get this problem presented to us by people say, well, that's all very well to say leadership's important, but how am I going to do it in my school? Or how am I going to facilitate that happening in a particular environment? So the elements of what I'm going to talk about are particularly focusing on leadership and student participation, so really going right down into that component, looking at the elements of leadership and school staff, the principals and the school executive. In different parts of the world we have different language for people who take leadership positions. We do acknowledge, of course, that leadership is distributed through the school, and you know, if there was more time I'd go in to talk about different roles that people could have. So it's principals and executive, the class teachers, and then leadership and students. Now, with the leadership and students, I'm going to talk about how would the principals and the school executive and class teachers develop leadership in students. There is, of course, a whole another body of knowledge about students who are leaders and how they see their role. That's not nearly theoretically and empirically developed as these other ones are with the principals and the class teachers. And of course, although many of you who involved with young people who are involved in schools would have been there where you had young people talking about how they were involved in the school council, or young people talking about how they were doing some peer teaching in the school. So there is a whole movement around student active involvement in schools, but I'm not going to talk about that part of it for this presentation. So let me just go through what Venka Zimoska has come up with in terms of what is student participation. She talks about it as pupil participation. We've chosen to use the term student. There's three types of participation as a motivation strategy, In this, the pupils are involved in activities that are often predetermined by adults, but students may have some choice. So, for example, sometimes the peer tutoring is a form of a motivation strategy. We'll get these students involved in the school, we'll train them to be tutors, and then they will tutor other students. The second one is as a teaching learning strategy, where students are guided to shape and direct their learning to ensure success. And a lot of the movement about child-centered learning is in this way. So the adults will set what the topics are, they'll give them the choices about what they can do, but somebody might say, well, I'll choose to make a video, and somebody else says, I'll choose to do some research in the library. And the third one is as an influence strategy, and also known as genuine participation, where students are actively encouraged to prioritise and make decisions. And this is a strategy where you're really working on the empowerment and capacity building of students to take part in the school community in a very active way, and that's not directed by adults. It might be facilitated by adults, but the students make the decisions and establish priorities and so on. So that's what we're talking about. So first of all, what leadership principles and class teachers offer student behaviours, and what do students need to act as leaders? So they're the two areas that I will look at. Student participation, the what and the why. We were talking in that about empowerment and capacity building, and they're the two elements that we're thinking about. Okay, how do we provide the conditions for the empowerment of young people, and what do they need to build their capacity to participate? As Audryn presented in terms of the student piece, and we just flipped it through and then I'll talk. She was talking about the what of all of those components and the why. Now the why actually provides a rationale for why we would do this. It's actually the evidence base. It's not I'm saying, oh, I think this would be a good idea. It's saying what we have from a theoretical point of view about motivation or self-determination theory or organisational theory is that this is quality practice. Or else what we've got from the empirical evidence was this was something that came out as a strong thing. And Marta will talk about that, about her research findings next. So this is the theoretical base for student participation. I won't go into that because I'm focusing on the how and the why. So again, we've got the rationale and the why, but it's a rationale for why you would do, how you would actually implement this. With principals and the school executive, the how is, how do you actually encourage student participation in a school? You ask and listen to students' perceptions of the school needs for change. And this is just a list. There can be many more that you might add to it. You develop teacher skills to facilitate this action. Now this is really important because across the world, teachers are at quite different places in terms of how comfortable they feel about giving some ownership to the direction of learning to students. And so they actually need a great deal, some need a great deal of professional development and professional learning, which is another one of our components, to actually get to the stage where they can truly involve the students in the classroom or in the school. Provide learning opportunities for staff to put aside their views and trust in young person's perspectives. My telephone's ringing in the background and I'll just ignore it, I'm sorry. I didn't, no, people don't ring me at 7:30 in the morning normally. Create varying structures to facilitate students' influence and participation. In other words, it's not just teaching them to do something, it's actually changing the structures in the schools and to influence their capacity to participate. To act as champions for students and demonstrate valuing their ideas. And again, this is a really important. It's all very well putting young people in a group, but if they come up with some priority and then the school says, oh no, we're not going to do that, then you're not actually valuing the whole process and their ideas and actions. Provide learning opportunities to enable students to act on their own ideas and to address them in an inclusive and non-judgmental way. Now you can see by these statements here that there is actually a whole learning process that needs to go on for students so that they can work with other students, so that they can work with adults about things. So it's not just about you get in and participate, it is that there actually needs to building their capacity and providing the learning opportunities which we would see as the conditions for the empowerment. Formalise students' opportunities for school decision-making, establishes their involvement as a key operational mechanism and provides for the inclusion of their perspectives. In other words, it is accepted practice that students do X. It's not that there's a teacher who has a good idea, it's that they have formal practice about it. And there's some of the theoretical and empirical based. As I said, a lot of this comes from an empirical base, and then people work with creating theories from the empirical base. So that's for principals. For classroom teachers, the class teachers initiate change in the physical environment of their classroom, their attitudes and their learning, and curriculum change to child-centered learning. Now, you can't have much participation in a classroom where students are all sitting in lines across the classroom and there's no capacity to move around. You're not going to have students talking with each other in that sort of environment. So you have to create that environment. Sometimes the environment is outside because that's more where they can work in terms of doing their whatever the task is they're doing. Again, classroom teachers will need some support to change their attitude to students and their learning if they have a particular view that the teacher stands out the front and the students learn. If that's their perspective, then they will need a great deal of support to change that and see that there's value in it. To bring about some curriculum change to the child-centered learning. Again, they will need support to do that. So this is the classroom teachers need to be aware of, you know, that to do this I'm going to need X, and obviously then the principals need to be able to be supportive, or other people facilitate this. So teachers then would engage in professional learning to acquire the relational pedagogy skills. So this is one of the areas that relational pedagogy that is really key in terms of understanding that a different relationship needs to be established between peers and between students and the school executive, and maybe even outside service providers. And this involves people being accepting of what's going on. And again, here's the theoretical and empirical base for that. So, building leadership in students, why? What we want to do is, what I've got here is just some examples of the how, and then in italics I've got the why. Why are we doing these particular things this way? The opportunities for voicing ideas and acting on them helps students to develop competence and responsibility to act. So that's what the rationale is. Helping students develop competence and rationality act. Shift in attitudes of both students and adults that I've suggested, they help develop a sense of personal, meaningful learning. And this is really interesting if you think about education, that to actually have young people engaged in schools, the learning needs to be meaningful, and it needs to be meaningful for themselves. So it's they themselves create the meaning for the particular learning they're engaged in. And this shifting in both attitudes of students and adults needs to occur for that. The development of students' communication skills to negotiate with peers and adults. And that's what I said before, that we need to teach young people how do you negotiate with outside service providers or parents or with the executive in the school. Students learn they can make a difference to themselves and others and act to bring about change. So this acting to bring about change, again, is the whole theoretical base about why you would be getting students involved. And it's often tied up with citizenship in some countries. So it's the development of them to take part in the society of their school and the wider community. So that was just to give you an example of how you did it, the opportunities, and then why you did it. This is why you're doing something. And that's always very useful to be able to say, now we're working on this because of this, and you're giving people a rationale for why you're doing this particular thing. So what does this mean then? The specificity of each component that Audryn presented to you. So I've given you some of the specificity for student participation. So each one of the components has that same amount. Provides implementers with evidence-based guidance for action. So it really means that if people are implementing these components, then and then they've got some rationale. So they can read the empirical research that somebody's done, said, oh yeah, I can see now why that would work in a particular environment. Then it gives them some flexibility. So this is the rationale that we're trying to get to. This is the thing that we're trying to achieve. Maybe in our school we have to tweak it a bit so that it becomes this. But we're all still trying to achieve this particular thing. So it's not that it won't be something that then we'll be able to evaluate. So if I'll just go back, the evaluator might say to them, what did you do that helped you develop their competence and responsibility to act? And for researchers, it actually now, because we have this specificity of these rationale of things, like developing their competence about something, there's some measurable elements of quality implementation can be developed and used to assess the fidelity of implementation based on the evidence base. So Audryn showed you the hole in the middle about implementation, and this is particularly focused on whole school implementation. We've had some indicators and so on, but we haven't had this holistic thing that we can then say, well, how do we find out about leadership? How would we identify if leadership is going on? Or how would we identify if there's really genuine participation of students? And let me just take that on one bit further for the researchers. If we take what I was saying there about asking and listening to students, developing teachers, then examples of measures could be that you look at time allocation. Okay, is there a time allocation that the principal of the school or the school executive set aside every week to discuss things with students? Is there professional learning time in the school? Okay, we're going to change to more child-centered learning. Is there professional learning time set aside to develop the teachers to do that? Provide learning opportunities for staff to develop trust in students' views and actions. Now this is where those of you who are educationists would understand the concept of reflective practice. And on reflective practice, a facilitator or somebody in the school who's skilled in it will ask people about, well, you know, how would you go about this? And then try it. Did it work? What would you do next time? And this allows the person in the school. So your measure would be, were there opportunities for the person who was trying to bring about some sort of change to actually reflect on their practice by themselves or with other people? Structures that facilitate students' influence. So again, that's like the first question. There's a time allocation and there's staff and student meetings. So there's two things structurally in the school that we would need to do if we were genuine about their students' participation. Act as champions for the students valuing their ideas. The principal, in his student meetings, he would be acting in a way and then saying to staff, I've had the students in talking with me about X. They've said so and so. We need to consider this. They've got an important point here. So in other words, they're actually not saying, oh, well, they've come to do it and, you know, what will we do? I was in a school once where they had student principal meetings, and the students were worried about the toilets. And that often comes up as an issue in schools. And they'd gone to the principal about the toilets and so on. Of course, the school didn't have much money. But they all sat down together, some of the school executives, the principals, and what they decided was they would get some paint and some other things, and that the students then would organise teams, obviously with a teacher there to sort of help these. They would manage it for them to paint the insides of the toilets. And that's what they did. So in other words, it wasn't exactly what the students wanted in that the school didn't do it, but they actually then got the students further involved. But it was all this whole point about valuing their ideas. And formalise students' opportunities for schools decision-making. Again, establish something as student councils. So these things don't disappear when the students move on or when teachers move on. So, my conclusion is the change pedagogy, teaching student relationships and listening to students underpins the empowerment and capacity building of students, impacting positively on their learning and engagement with schools. And just for your future reference, there's some references that might be useful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Louise. We'll just as a note, we will be posting the slides as well as the recording on the web pages that you used to get here, and so you'll be able to find these references at the end of Louise's presentation. Our final presenter, and I'm just going to, as I will go to the slides where Matt Deschênes' presentation begins, just so we get that. Matt will be presenting en français, and I looked at the registrations, and it's a pretty good mix of English and French-speaking participants, so I'm very pleased to note that. And also to add that one of the neat things coming out of our recent Montreal conference that involved IUHPE and the Institute for Public Health in Quebec and others is that we agreed that we would try to develop a French-speaking international network that would be associated with ISHN, and a number of people from France and Switzerland and Canada and other countries agreed to try to get that started. And I'd love to see some presentations en français or in Spanish or other languages. So because this tool obviously is usable by a number of languages. But so to introduce Matt's presentation, Matt, if you could make your remarks, and perhaps I'll add a little bit in English at the end. We can take questions in French or in English in the text box, and as well, if you have questions or comments en français, veuillez utiliser votre micro ou taper dans le chat box aussi. Okay, Matt, if you could take us through your presentation. Are you able to turn on your mic? You need to turn on your mic, Matt, if that's maybe what the difficulty might be. Just the talk button in the upper left. There we go.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So thank you, Louise, and thank you, Adrian. I've just mentioned that I think my presentation is in continuation with what you've just presented, particularly on a theoretical basis. And my presentation will focus on the professional development and links with leadership and other components. Now I will switch in French. Donc, le développement professionnel, on s'y intéresse parce qu'on peut se demander si ça peut faciliter l'absorption finalement d'une approche globale ou systémique en promotion de la santé au sein des écoles. Pourquoi s'intéresser à cette question? Eh bien, le constat de recherche, autant les nôtres que celles qui se sont menées ailleurs, ont fait ressortir quand même plusieurs barrières qui pouvaient mettre un frein finalement à l'adoption et à l'implantation d'une approche globale en promotion de la santé, malgré une réceptivité qui peut être présente chez plusieurs acteurs. Et parmi ces barrières-là, ce qu'on retrouve, c'est des contraintes organisationnelles au sein de l'école. On sait que les écoles sont très fortement sollicitées et qu'il y a souvent sous forme de commandes aussi qui viennent des autorités ministérielles. Un soutien mitigé des autorités, souvent un soutien plus symbolique que réellement concret. Une assimilation aussi de l'approche qui est limitée à quelques champions dans l'école. Donc, nous, nos recherches, ce qu'elles ont montré, c'est que même dans les écoles où on adoptait l'approche école en santé, ça ne descendait pas vraiment au niveau du personnel scolaire, au niveau de l'école en entier. peu de démarches structurantes aussi. C'est que même aussi dans les écoles qui adoptent l'approche, ce qu'on perçoit, c'est d'un activisme répandu. Donc, il n'y a pas vraiment de démarche qui est capable de s'appuyer vraiment sur des pratiques efficaces en promotion de la santé. Un soutien insuffisant, souvent au niveau, par exemple, technique, au niveau des outils qui sont proposés, pas suffisamment vulgarisés et contextualisés, ce qui nous amène finalement à constater qu'il n'y a pas de véritable absorption de l'approche dans le fonctionnement des écoles. Donc, on est toujours face à un défi de faisabilité et ça pose la question des capacités. Donc, on a voulu mieux comprendre pourquoi, finalement, en s'appuyant finalement sur des fondements théoriques. On a fait également une recension des écrits, que ce soit en gestion, en éducation, en promotion de la santé, pour être capable de voir finalement quelles étaient les conditions essentielles qui permettraient peut-être de changer ou d'améliorer les capacités d'absorption des écoles ou en fait dans les organisations. Il y a comme deux grands courants qui sont ressortis de cette recension-là en termes de gestion du changement au regard des innovations et par rapport à la diffusion des innovations, mais dans une conception qui est dynamique et sociale et non pas linéaire comme on pouvait peut-être le voir auparavant. À l'intérieur de ces courants-là, il y a un concept clé, en tout cas qui nous est apparu très éclairant pour aller à avoir une meilleure compréhension finalement de ces conditions-là. Et c'est le concept d'absorptive capacité, de capacité d'absorption, qui a été d'abord élaboré par Zara et Georges. On l'a repris en le bonifiant finalement des écrits, que ce soit en éducation ou en promotion de la santé. D'ailleurs, ce sera publié très prochainement et ça permet de voir vraiment là, ces aspects-là. Et ça rejoint tout à fait ce que Audrey a présenté aussi au départ. Oups, ça je ne le présenterai pas parce que c'est trop compliqué. Je n'aurai pas le temps, ça non plus, ça non plus. Voilà. Et dans ce qu'on a fait finalement, dans les conditions qui apparaissaient comme étant importantes pour développer les capacités d'absorption, il y a vraiment une condition aussi qui est ressortie, qui était le besoin de formation, la nécessité d'un soutien professionnel qui est convivial et adapté aux besoins locaux. Donc, finalement, ça constitue un élément actif du renforcement des capacités d'absorption au regard d'une approche globale en promotion de la santé, sur lequel aussi on peut agir, et en tout cas ici au Québec, on a un mandat pour être capable aussi de soutenir finalement l'accompagnement ou la formation. Donc, ce qui nous a amené à proposer un modèle d'intervention et à l'expérimenter. Et à ce moment-là, on est vraiment plus dans le comment. Comment on est capable finalement d'agir sur ce mécanisme-là de développement professionnel. Le modèle sur lequel on s'est appuyé, c'est un modèle d'accompagnement socio-constructiviste. Les objectifs, développer des compétences professionnelles des acteurs clés des écoles avec leurs partenaires, renforcer les conditions organisationnelles et ajuster finalement ce qu'on peut appeler le fit entre l'école en santé, donc une approche globale, et son contexte. Les principales composantes de ce modèle-là s'appuient sur la co-construction. C'est-à-dire qu'ici, on a vraiment un processus d'échange interactif entre les facilitateurs externes et les acteurs clés des écoles. Donc, c'est vraiment une mise en commun des expertises, autant expérientielles que théoriques. Un questionnement réflexif ancré dans la pratique. Donc, on questionne les pratiques existantes, les modes organisationnels, en vue de les bonifier pour mieux répondre aux priorités identifiées. Un cycle apprentissage, action, réflexion avec des allers-retours fréquents entre les facilitateurs externes et internes. Donc, on a beaucoup de modélisation, donc du modeling qui peut se faire aussi par ce biais-là. Habilitation et facilitation, dans le sens qu'on veut rendre les acteurs du milieu les maîtres d'œuvre de leur changement, des actions qu'ils mettent en place. Une autre composante, la qualité des facilitateurs externes, et ça rejoint peut-être un peu ce que Louise mentionnait tout à l'heure au niveau des jeunes, mais c'est aussi valable finalement quand on fait aussi de l'accompagnement auprès d'adultes. Donc, comme qualité des accompagnateurs, on a bien sûr l'expertise, la crédibilité, mais aussi le savoir-être. Et je crois que dans l'expérimentation qu'on a faite, les qualités relationnelles des facilitateurs est une composante incontournable. Donc, c'est vraiment quelque chose qui est essentiel si on veut réellement amener un changement et une prise en charge finalement du changement par les acteurs. En fait, une variété d'acteurs, parce que même si l'accompagnement se concentrait sur quelques acteurs clés, dont les directions d'école et les acteurs locaux, qui sont généralement désignés pour accompagner les écoles, il y a plusieurs acteurs qui ont été touchés par des ramifications parce que ces acteurs-là agissaient également comme agents multiplicateurs auprès d'autres acteurs dans l'école. Les activités d'accompagnement, ce sont des activités de transfert et de partage des savoirs, savoir-faire, savoir-être, qui sont conformes aux composantes de l'approche École en santé, aux mécanismes organisationnels et aux principes d'un accompagnement socio-constructiviste. Donc, on voit vraiment que ce type d'approche-là, c'est une facilitation qui est en contexte. Donc, ce n'est pas uniquement là, une formation souvent de courte durée. On est vraiment dans un processus où il y a un changement qui est en mesure de se faire. L'expérimentation a permis également d'identifier des stratégies efficaces pour faciliter les changements organisationnels et de pratique, comme par exemple le soutien des objectifs de l'école. Donc finalement, ce qu'on note, c'est que on ne part pas d'un modèle théorique et d'une démarche qui serait déjà prédéfinie. On a des éléments, mais le point de départ est vraiment les objectifs de l'école et les besoins de l'école, de façon à réellement être capable de mobiliser aussi la direction de l'école de façon à ce qu'il participe aussi à ce type de projet-là. Proposer à l'école une démarche structurante mais flexible pour la planification des actions et une mise en œuvre de qualité. L'approche École en santé a été utilisée, surtout dans sa forme de planification globale et concertée, comme étant une démarche sur laquelle on pouvait s'appuyer, non pas seulement pour répondre à des objectifs de santé, mais également à des objectifs éducationnels. Prendre appui sur les priorités du milieu, donc les milieux ont des priorités, ça devient le fil conducteur et à ce moment-là, on utilise les structures en place pour créer une synergie des actions. Ce qui veut dire qu'à ce moment-là, c'est de trouver toutes les portes d'entrée qu'on peut pour être capable de toucher le plus d'acteurs possible dans l'école. Donc, on passe d'une priorité qui peut être uniquement détenue par la direction d'école ou quelques champions, à une priorité qui est réellement portée par l'ensemble des acteurs scolaires. Une mise en relief des conditions organisationnelles nécessaires pour mobiliser les enseignants et bonifier les actions. Ici, ça touche particulièrement les directions d'école. C'est important qu'ils réalisent, qu'ils soient sensibilisés à l'importance de mettre en place des conditions organisationnelles de façon à obtenir les changements voulus. Un accompagnement également continu et relativement intense. Donc, comme je le mentionnais tout à l'heure, on ne peut pas se satisfaire uniquement de formations qui sont de courte durée. Ce n'est pas suffisant pour amener ce genre de changement-là. L'expérimentation a réellement permis d'observer des changements avec ce modèle-là d'accompagnement socio-constructiviste. Donc, des compétences professionnelles accrues en termes d'appropriation des savoirs, un sentiment de confiance et de compétences augmentées. Donc, les acteurs se sont dit mieux outillés et surtout une capacité de réinvestissement des apprentissages, autant dans l'école qu'à l'extérieur de l'école. Au niveau des leviers et des mécanismes organisationnels, on note aussi un leadership qui est plus mobilisateur, une vision plus systémique, donc être capable de voir les liens entre les différentes mesures, entre les différentes démarches qui sont possibles dans une école et d'être capable de les intégrer, d'avoir une gestion intégrative de ces mesures-là. Une plus grande participation des acteurs, donc du travail conjoint, mais également une mobilisation plus grande, entre autres, des enseignants, une communication plus large et plus fréquente à propos des actions liées à l'école en santé, et un réseautage accru, particulièrement avec les organismes de la communauté. Par contre, ce qui est un peu un paradoxe, on voit moins de réseautage avec les centres locaux de santé pour des questions de gouvernance et des questions de priorisation finalement dans ces organisations-là. Des changements aussi observés dans les capacités d'absorption suite à l'expérimentation. Là, je ne vous ai pas présenté tout le modèle conceptuel, mais quand on parle de capacité d'absorption, on est à un niveau potentiel et réalisé. Dans les études de cas qu'on a menées auparavant, dans les écoles qui avaient déjà adopté l'approche École en santé depuis quelques années, on a vu beaucoup de traces d'acquisition et d'assimilation. Donc, on est au niveau potentiel. Les gens acquièrent donc des nouveaux savoirs, par exemple les recommandations d'experts qui permettent de cibler des actions efficaces en promotion-prévention. On voit aussi des traces d'assimilation, c'est-à-dire une plus grande compréhension de ces savoirs-là, ou de comment on peut finalement les intégrer dans le fonctionnement. Mais on avait très peu vu de capacité d'absorption réalisée. Avec cette expérimentation-là, on a fait vraiment un pas en avant dans le sens qu'on a plusieurs traces de transformation. Donc, que ce soit en termes d'optimisation ou vraiment de changement dans les façons de faire. Par exemple, les recommandations d'experts ont été vraiment réutilisées dans plusieurs contextes, pas seulement pour la santé, mais pour l'éducation. Le plan d'action en santé a été vraiment intégré dans le projet éducatif, ce qui n'était pas le cas dans la plupart des sites où on était. On était dans 3 écoles. Une bonification des mesures internes qui rejoignent des enseignants, dont on a expérimenté également des situations d'apprentissage et d'évaluation, donc qui mobilisait finalement un groupe d'enseignants dans chacune des écoles. Une participation active des élèves, donc on voit des actions concrètes dans lesquelles l'engagement actif des élèves a été pris en considération, et ça rejoint un peu finalement les éléments qui ont été mentionnés tout à l'heure par Louise également. Et on note quelques traces d'exploitation. Quand on est rendu à ce niveau-là, on parle surtout de pérennisation, donc l'insertion finalement des transformations dont on a pu faire mention dans les routines de l'école. Pour l'instant, étant donné que la période d'observation était quand même relativement courte, on était sur 1 an, on n'est pas capable en ce moment de dire si réellement il y aura une pérennisation de ce qui a été initié en cours d'expérimentation, même si on a déjà des rétroactions de la part des directions d'école qui nous mentionnent finalement que ça s'est poursuivi pour plusieurs des actions. Pardon. En conclusion, le développement professionnel, oui, peut augmenter les capacités d'absorption potentielles et réalisées des écoles lorsque le mode d'accompagnement est approprié. Approprié là, dans le sens qu'on n'est pas dans une conception simpliste et linéaire de la diffusion d'une innovation. C'est un processus qui exige des modes de partage de connaissances, de facilitation et d'accompagnement qui sont adaptatifs plutôt que prescriptifs, plus contextualisés et axés sur l'habilitation, donc sur l'empowerment. Ce que ça mentionne également, c'est que ça prend des conditions facilitantes internes. On parle de temps, de libération, d'engagement et d'investissement de l'école, ce qui soulève quand même aussi certains défis qu'on a pu voir dans l'expérimentation, c'est comment généraliser ou extrapoler les leçons tirées de cette expérimentation-là à plus grande échelle. Donc ici, on est plus vraiment dans, non pas une généralisation statistique, mais une généralisation qui est beaucoup plus conceptuelle. Donc, c'est d'essayer de tirer ces leçons-là et de voir comment on peut les appliquer là, dans d'autres contextes. Les enjeux. Le développement professionnel est un mécanisme sur lequel on peut intervenir pour faciliter l'absorption d'une innovation qui est nécessaire mais non suffisant. D'autres conditions sont requises. Au niveau de l'école, entre autres, un leadership mobilisateur. Donc, et un prérequis, c'est d'abord la réceptivité et la volonté de la direction d'aller dans ce sens-là. Parce que l'accompagnement dont je vous ai parlé peut amener un renforcement du leadership mobilisateur, donc d'un soutien organisationnel au niveau de la gestion et au niveau de l'influence, un leadership plus élargi, mais ça prend au départ une réceptivité et une volonté de la direction. On a pu voir la différence que ça peut faire là, dans le renforcement des capacités lorsque ces conditions-là sont là. Une marge de manœuvre, c'est-à-dire du temps pour réfléchir et du temps pour explorer. Les directions d'école nous disent régulièrement qu'ils n'ont pas le temps de réfléchir, ils sont dans une gestion d'urgence. Donc, à ce moment-là, ça prend un temps, ça prend un espace pour être capable d'explorer et d'innover. Une infrastructure qui permet de contrer les effets liés au roulement du personnel, ce qui est une problématique importante dans les petits milieux, les petites écoles en régions éloignées, où on voit un roulement là, très, très important. Donc, il faut avoir une infrastructure qui permet de dépasser uniquement là, que ça repose sur quelques champions. Enfin, des enjeux qui dépassent le niveau de l'école, donc au niveau des instances décisionnelles, un leadership, évidemment, comme je mentionnais tout à l'heure, un leadership qui s'appuie sur un soutien non pas symbolique, mais concret, pour orienter le changement. Une gestion intégrative qui permet finalement de contrer les silos et la surcharge, parce qu'actuellement, tout descend, c'est du top-down, donc ça descend dans les écoles avec de nombreuses priorités, ce qui amène vraiment un foisonnement de toutes sortes de mesures. Et pour les écoles, c'est vraiment une fatigue à l'innovation et une difficulté finalement là, de changer aussi ce qui pourrait être changé. La communication et la collaboration entre les acteurs des deux réseaux pour unir les efforts et obtenir des gains plus significatifs, c'est une chose qu'on avait déjà mis en lumière, nous, ici au Québec, ce manque de collaboration, même si c'est en train de changer. Et en fait, l'articulation d'une approche systémique en promotion-prévention avec des savoirs spécifiques en santé, accessibles et adaptés au contexte scolaire. Peut-être pour reprendre un peu ce qui s'est passé au Québec, c'est qu'on avait souvent, on présentait l'approche école en santé comme un cadre intégrateur, mais les contenus thématiques en promotion-prévention n'étaient pas assez articulés à cette planification-là globale et concertée. Donc actuellement, il y a des travaux en cours qui vont dans ce sens-là. Donc, en conclusion, je dirais que le développement professionnel est un élément important à considérer et on voit enfin les liens, les interrelations qu'il peut y avoir avec d'autres éléments, d'autres composantes finalement pour développer les capacités d'absorption par rapport à une approche systémique en promotion de la santé.
Merci beaucoup, Nat, c'était bien fait. Maybe we can just go back to that slide because I'd like to use that a bit. But I'd ask people to, if you have microphones, please just raise your hand and I'll recognize you and you can add a comment or a question for the participants. And I also see that we've got questions already coming up. So this is from Carol Yadrensky from Canada. For Louise, what boundaries are appropriate to support student participation and engagement, and what if student values don't complement the school board's values on social issues, for example? Another example, a concrete example of using marijuana with friends and family. How do we address that issue of engaging youth, empowering youth, but also recognizing that there's potential conflicts? Louise?
Well, that's a great question to start with. I think that this is where you get into the complexity of managing a school value system and then individual value system. And I think this is probably a very good question in terms of the leadership as well, because when we talk about school executives, and hopefully in consultation with the community, they would be setting the values and norms that's going to be acceptable in the school. And of course, if you are going to involve the schools, this would be a really key point to make sure is firmly in place, that there's policies about drug use, that there's always a very clear picture about how the principal handles any of that. And so maybe in the health teaching that goes on in the school, there's also some very clear guidance about what's acceptable in this school and what's not. And so therefore, if students are negotiating with the school executive about things, or there's some sort of discussion about it, then that's when it would come up. Now, in regards to family values and then the student and then the school, that's always a problem. You know, if you have a father who comes up to the school and says, you know, why you telling my son that he can't, you know, sort of do so and so. I've told him to stand up for himself. Then you have a clash of values, and principals manage this all the time. And I think the way that they then often come around it is by looking at the policies that exist in the school, and that's some sort of guidance for the students. So that I think the boundaries would be about what do we accept as appropriate behaviour in the school, and that should be enshrined in bullying policies, and also organisational things in the school. if there is, particular organisations in the school, like they might have homerooms or so on, that all of those things come into then discussions that there might be about students wanting to do a particular thing and them not fitting in with the boundaries, which are the practices of the school that are documented, and all people verbalise it, so people in disciplined positions. That's the best answer I can have, but a really good question.
Okay, and Audryn or Matt, do you want to add a comment on that, or please do.
Okay, I might join then, Audryn here. I think it's always, when it comes to student participation and student influence, I think one of the key issues is to, throughout the whole of schooling, to build collective values and build around what are the democratic principles and the majority values that we want to support. And then there should of course be room for deviant approaches and values. But I think that if there is a common core of shared values that are supportive of a healthy development, and where we agree on what is less healthy or less functional approaches and behaviors, it's easier to manage such an issue as is raised here within more the collective values, and still allowing for people to choose or have their individual approaches when they are outside of that collective setting of agreed values.
Okay, Marc, do you have a comment? En français, si tu veux. I see your mic's on.
Oh, no. Okay, my microphone. Can you understand French?
Oui.
Carole?
Perhaps not. No, unfortunately she's saying no.
So
okay.
I'll pass.
Okay. Well, maybe just to keep the conversation going, and those who are online, if you'd like to add questions the way that Carol did, please do so. But I wanted to pick up on that very last point in Marc's presentation, and I think it underlines the urgency of this thematic discussion we're hoping to have over the next several months is shifting towards a systematic approach, as it's explained in that last point in Matt's presentation. As many of you know, I watch a lot of the journals these days, and there's a whole bunch of stuff going on about ecological approaches and complex adaptive systems and so on, and so people are starting to make that shift. What I liked about the presentations today is that they took that great number of, and it can be for the practitioner a jumble of ideas and complex ideas that need a lot of time and thought, which most people in the front lines or even the mid-level systems don't have that much time, and have started to articulate some specific ways forward, be it in terms of a new approach to professional development, new ways of engaging students, or a new focus on leadership, and those are the three comments we heard today. But they're also, the three speakers have given us some concrete ideas of how to measure that and how to move forward, and what the traces of things that are beginning to happen, because I think we really need to shift our thinking. But at the same time, there's some real dilemmas, and here's my comment and ask the three speakers to respond to it, is there's a kind of a marriage of convenience between the open, complex, adaptive systems that schools are, where they pick up very quickly on new ideas. And regardless of what's happening in the Ministry of Education, local schools are picking up on the issues of the day and helping to try to provide stuff to their kids in the best way they know how. And so they're open to small changes. And then on the health system side, and I think we also need to think about the health system side, is the health promotion component of the health system, representing about 2% of the expenditures, is still structured around the diseases of the day, because they're asked to deal with the emerging diseases as they come out, and they then have to respond, and then they develop specific issue programs and so on. And so for a system that's able to absorb change, small change quite quickly, but big change very slowly, to have little ideas with little issues of the day, which is quite topical, what the teachers are already worried about because they, like others in the society, see the problem, then there's this kind of agreement to pick up on the small bits and pieces of programs rather than to try to do that shift towards a systems-based approach. So I guess is there comments that any of the three speakers would like to make? Because I think we need to really get out of this trap if we can, and I'm hoping this series of discussions will help us do that.
Marthe, yes. What we realized in the experimentation we've made is that even if the principles are very submergé, overwhelmed about this emergency and everything, they could realize that planification is very important for them, and they could accomplish more if they have this kind of systemic approach. So I think they realize that within this particular experimentation. So I think they can do it. They can change, even if it is difficult and it takes time. So they recognize that it takes time to make that kind of change, but they could see that it was worth doing that.
Yeah, so again here, I think also that the components that we identified through the different studies that had been addressing implementation of health mode in schools is exactly that, the more systematic approaches towards the planning, the professional development, the student participation, so that there is both a step-by-step development relating to the readiness and the capacity of the school, and so looking at the totality of resources and placing the actions and the aims within the overall visions of the school, and taking and linking it to the daily life of school and the learning environment and the learning activities. And I certainly agree that a systematic and systemic approach, linking the different processes going on within the school and the systems of students and staff, as well as building on the competencies that are represented by the different services that the schools collaborate with, as well as the local community and parents, is the step forward. But acknowledging that you can't do it all at once, and you can't do it excellently at once. So to have a systematic approach, but acknowledge that the change can only, and the development can only happen step by step, and the smaller the steps, possibly the more assured you are that you can bring your whole staff on board and have people join you over a longer period of time, compared to if you go in with a very massive and ambitious approach with little resources, and people get exhausted because they don't see how they can manage that on top of all the other tasks that they already are managing in a daily school life.
Thanks. And Louise, I think you just came back into the meeting. Probably the internet, excuse me, flow broken there. Did you hear the point?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Oh yes, I've heard them. I just want to sort of elaborate that sort of dilemma, and I think it sort of brings in a number of things. And the first thing is that if schools are interested in, and I'll give you the example of bullying. if they sort of, that's their little issue, then I think the difficulty arises then is that if you have people who have a bullying program and that's the only way they see the world and what should be going on in schools, then they'll go in and do it and we won't get this comprehensive approach. But I think if it does involve health systems, it's one of the points that is increasingly becoming very evident is that a lot of diseased-focused health professionals do not understand health promotion, let alone health promotion with schools. And the principles underpinning it all, so in terms of taking a whole school approach. So what's really needed, along with everything else, is some solid professional development and learning for health personnel. So that, and I think that in some ways, some of that needs, if we can educate the schools about a holistic approach, then we can then encourage them to take ownership of it. And when somebody says, yes, we've got the answer for you with your bullying problem, they'll say, well, we take a whole school approach to it. How does it work within that? So I think there needs to be a two-way process of schools feeling comfortable enough with the concept of it, even though, you know, they might be using it for the first time with bullying, but then they realise as soon as they start working on it, well, this is really a whole mental health issue, and then they can branch out from that. So it's using it as health people, using it as an entry point for them to help facilitate a holistic approach, so educate the school about that, or the health professionals being educated by the school saying, we take this approach and that's the way we'd like to work.
Great. And just to, I see that Sean Slade from ASCD has joined us, and Sean, I'd like you to maybe, if you do have a microphone on, comment on a new kind of marriage between the whole school approach, as Louise has just articulated, and the whole child approach, which often educators are approaching. But before we go there, Bies has asked a question about the issue of schools now closing their doors to outside implementers because of time constraints. There's too many learning objectives to cover in a short period of time, and again, that's a bit of the reality check. And so comments on that question from any of our presenters.
Well, maybe I'll start off then. I think in order for health promotion to not be worthwhile, but to have schools give priority to that, we also need to look into changes in what the schools are asked to report on, or what are the learning objectives of, or the learning outcomes of the schools. And I think this is something that we in Norway now are starting to talk about, because we do have health promotion goals presented in our general parts of the curriculum, but when it comes to the school subjects and what students are graded by and what is reported, or what the schools are asked to report to the educational governments, they are all subject-related matters and not related to the more overall well-being and thriving of the students and the development of social competencies and capacities and competencies developed through a health promotion initiative development. So I think that is a major issue in order to have schools give priority and give room to external implementers, or to giving emphasis to this, to the health promoting school approach. But it also is related to the school's experiences, I guess, then with the effectiveness or the outcomes of the approaches taken, and maybe it isn't the most beneficial way for the schools that an external implementer comes into the school, unless this person is very familiar with the school and teaching and how the whole school approaches and health promoting school approaches work in that particular school. So I think it's about the contextualization as well, and then the priorities of the school.
Great.
I just wanted to say that I think that health professionals need to be very flexible in the way that they approach things, and I think that's something that's often not recognised. And having been around for some time in this field, there's cycles of things that go on, and therefore you sometimes have to shift your approach. So that one of the components is policy and institutional anchoring. And so if there is a move going on at say a ministerial level in the country about focusing on literacy and numeracy and so on, then trying to get individual schools to cooperate with what you're doing is going to be very hard. They will be shutting their doors. And I acknowledge the point that Audrey's made as well, is about if there's been quality practice, then they'll go on. They always have some sort of sense of being able to manage their own things. They'll go on and they'll do what they're doing because they see value in it. But if they haven't had a good experience with outside providers, then they will close the door. So that's a whole other area. But the health professionals may need to take one step back and say, okay, well, we now need to negotiate with the ministry or the regional office or whoever it is, because we've got to take one step back to actually get what we see is important on the agenda again. And so it's not just the schools are closing the door. Okay, if they have closed the door, then what is our role now as health promoters? And it's to go into the advocacy and the policy area.
Great.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, because what we've learned in our experimentation is that even if school open the door, if they don't have the support from the authorities, and they are probably the most influence about the overload of the school, because of this top-down approach of many programs that are offered in parallel to the school. So I think if at that level they can integrate a little bit more what they are offering to schools, I think it would be a facilitating factor, I think.
That's Sean, I'm not sure if you're able to join it, make that comment about the whole child and the whole school. I'll leave that perhaps for the very end of this session, because we are coming up to the 90 minutes when we try to finish up. And I'll perhaps just give a little bit of information about the next session, which is a nice segue. The next session we'll be doing in this series is on interministry collaboration in school mental health. And so the interministry collaboration piece, which is partnerships, as Audrey mentioned in her remarks and have come through, the systematic approach is to try to look at that level of the systems to be able to make sure that the policy, the partnerships, the knowledge exchange, the plan for sustainability, all those pieces that are referred to in terms of capacity-based thinking are being worked on at that level before, not before, because the schools will already be dealing with these issues, but to think about multiple levels in multiple systems so we're going to be exploring that in the next session, and then coming back to a second session on capacity, looking again, maybe and as well as a parallel discussion group of this, as many of you might know. The funding that we have for this series of workshops is being given to us by the Mental Health Commission of Canada. So they've been kind enough to allow us to look at these implementation and capacity issues and sustainability issues generically, recognizing that we can learn from that and apply it to school mental health or any of the other 25 issues that schools have to address. So we're lucky that way. And that's also how we got started. We had some subsidies funding, and so we looked at the agenda. That's where that long list of topics, initial long list of topics came from is a discussion that was funded in Canada from our community of practice on substance abuse prevention. So we hopefully are starting to look at the many issues associated with this. We had a great presentation from a school superintendent looking at capacity, and we have actually, as you may have noticed in the email, a reminder that went out recently that we do have a bit of a discussion of capacity that's based on the WHO model. We had a good discussion on how that capacity model can be used. Carmen Alginger from EDC had done some work for WHO on how to assess and to plan for capacity building at a state or a country level, and so that was another session. Our most recent session really looked at the nitty-gritty of teacher training around specific programs, and for me it was a real eye-opener to note that less than 5% of teachers in the U.S., and this is a report that's just come out, are following an evidence-based prevention program that is well implemented, that they have implemented well, and so that's maybe more evidence that we need to shift our thinking, not to blame the teachers, because there's another discussion to be had about how teachers need to adapt these programs into the context that they're working in the classroom, kids they're facing, but rather to look at the impossible dream of being able to control everything in this ecological environment, and therefore another reason for shifting our gears and looking at a broader picture. So I'm hopeful that those of you online now and the 50 people who have been following thus far will go to the web page, and I'll post that in a moment in the chat box. But for those of you who are continuing on, I'm hoping that we're going to be able to have a number of topics like this and a number of discussions like this. So I'm going to, on your behalf, thank our 3 presenters today who have agreed to be a small leadership group for the discussion. We're looking for volunteers to do other sessions. It looked like our last session prompted 1 or 2 people to volunteer to do another discussion around capacity building and fidelity to the approach that our presenters have described today. So the issue of fidelity when we're building this kind of approach is going to be another session in this series, and so it's an ongoing conversation. And Louise had mentioned technology, and it is wonderful to be able to link continents and to be able to tape record a session so people can come to it at their convenience. But I am hopeful that we're also going to be including other technologies, the Wikipedia Still website that we've got, and our Twitter accounts, which are posting the titles of various journals and articles. There are number of ways that we can use technology to make this information transfer a lot easier. And our dream is that we would have these live discussions, or these recorded discussions, supported by summaries, Wikipedia-style summaries. So I'm hoping that we can use both. So I'd encourage people to go to that page and also to make comments on it. We're now able to, as consumers, make comments on a variety of things. Please make them. You can make them anonymously, or you can sign into the page, but please participate in that wiki-based way as well. I see a number of people have already said their thanks to the session, and again, excellent presentations. Sean, are you still there? And do you have a microphone? Can you give us a positive thought for closing? I see Sean is typing, so. No mic, unfortunately. Well, thank you, Sean, for being here. And as I say, there is a compatibility, a new marriage to be made around educator concerns for the whole child and health concerns for the whole school approach. And so let's try to work towards that goal. Final comments from any of the presenters before we close up the session?
Just thanks very much, Doug, for getting us the technology to be able to do these things.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Yes, thank you. And I think this is an important approach to try to share information, I think, to inform practice and research. But I think it's also very important to to have practice also inform our continued research and the need for specificity, as Louise was stressing in her presentation, in terms of how we, through research, can contribute to quality practice. But in order for that, we need to have all the feedback from the practice in terms of the usability of the different approaches and to what extent more specificity is needed, or whether the schools are able to develop that themselves based on more generic principles.
Excellent. Thank you all again. For those of you who are in the session, please go under File at the top of the page and choose the Exit button. And I'll be turning off the recording now.